The wildfire continues to rage.
It's only going to get worse.
The worst air quality on the planet.
Wildfires are in the news at the moment for all the wrong reasons. But at this point, CGTN is looking at how intentionally started fires can have a positive impact. In the last episode, experts explained that ensuring safety remains the key challenge for prescribed burns. In this episode, CGTN speaks to Indigenous people about the challenges they face when conducting another form of intentional blaze, cultural burns.
The frustration was always there where people weren't listened to, and Aboriginal people were never listened to. They were actually put down and not given the chance to have a say or be at the round table. And still today, we're having a voice in Parliament, and they're still struggling to get us recognised in the Constitution in this country to be able to, be part of the solutions.
I think Indigenous people have been really removed from being able to do that. And so for me, it's also kind of about a social justice issue. There's also a lot of structural racism in governments in Canada where, Indigenous knowledge is looked down as lesser than.
Indigenous people from Australia and Canada say they also have to overcome legal and financial barriers if they want to set a fire.
Indigenous nations that want to burn on their territories will need government permission, so they have to basically complete what can sometimes be very complex prescribed fire plans. I think that for Indigenous peoples that I work with, their frustration is that they're being repeatedly impacted by fire. And they're not able to do anything about it at the moment.
Yes, there are communities doing it, and there's little burns happening, and there's mentorship programs. We're involved in a lot of mentorship programs, but the government's not recognizing that.
Financial support provided by government is minimal compared with the millions, even billions of US dollars budgeted every year to support prescribed burns.
We basically need a movement of Indigenous fire guardians where there's lots of Indigenous people out on the landscape putting fire there. And I think economically it makes sense as well because we spend a lot of money on firefighting and suppression costs. So, if instead we're putting some of that money towards these fire guardian programs, then hopefully, that would pay off in the long term in terms of reducing suppression costs.
There's a massive gap between the funding that's sourced for firefighting and versus funding to support looking after the land with fire. But there needs to be far more investment in looking after the land and doing fire to protect country like Aboriginal burning practices.
Experts say that Indigenous people's specialist knowledge should be recognized.
So Aboriginal people have managed the land for thousands of years with fire. And the whole landscape has evolved with fire because of people being a part of landscape with fire. And so a lot of our ecosystems depend on fire to germinate.
I think a lot of the objectives of modern prescribed burning are trying to, mimic as safely as possible some of the cultural burning practices of the past. Certainly some of the ways they differ is just in the use of technology. There's a huge amount of respect for the Indigenous burning practices of the past, and we're trying to kind of relearn what those people knew and applied in the past.
We have so much to learn, I think, from cultural practitioners and from Indigenous folks who have been here for forever.
In addition, experts believe that if the two methods, prescribed and culture burns, are utilized together, they can become more effective.
The Canadian landscape is just huge, right? And we need a lot of prescribed and cultural fire on the landscape, especially in this new area of climate change. So I don't think one group can just go and do it by themselves.
I think it's really important that the prescribed fire community and the cultural burning community are very close and interwoven and overlapping, and they're not like this separate, they're really like this.
Experts also stress that people's fundamental approach to fire also needs to be rethought.
Fire is important to renew the land and to bring back fresh grasses and food for the animals, and most importantly, to take care of the landscape from wildfire
So it's always going to be there, and we've learned to live kind of with the others, and so we need to learn to live with fire as well. And
I think people should understand the relationship that their landscape has to fire. So I always tell people, like, when you look out across any landscape across the world, really, that landscape has a fire story to tell.